Welcome to the Hoops&Huddle podcast. I am Maliika, and today we have an ABA focus episode. I am so excited. I read the book Loose Balls, which is basically an oral history of the ABA. And I was just, it was such a great journey going down ABA history. I had to bring on someone I respect greatly on the history of the game, especially the ABA. Jason Levin is here to talk to me about loose balls. So, Jason, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll get started?
All right, all good. Always happy to talk about the ABA. So, looking forward to this. I wrote about the NBA for a long time, from the late 80s through early 2000s. And then I read Loose Balls a long time ago, and then got really excited about learning more about the ABA and did that for a number of years, got to know a lot of the players. I'm currently working on a book about the ABA. And I guess the most exciting thing is there's a new documentary coming out. It's
I
finished.
can't
And
wait. I'm so excited about the doc.
well, you're gonna have to wait, but this is the latest news is good and I guess kind of bad. Um, Two good news. One, I'm one of the main narrators, so that should be fun.
That's
Um,
fun.
yeah, you're gonna get tired of seeing my face. Uh, So that's exciting. The second good thing is that it was done by Amazon. And Amazon, as you, I'm sure, know, just announced that they're in big with the NBA now. They got a big part of the contract.
Yep.
And so the bad news is because of that, they're going to delay putting it on until early 2026. I
Oh,
know. It was supposed to be early next year, like All-Star game coming up, but they pushed it back a year because they don't start with the NBA until that year. So they
so
want
it makes
to
sense from a timing
it
standpoint. It does line
it
up.
and they can do, and this is I guess their line of thinking and justifying it, which makes sense, is that they're going to be able to do about 8 to 10 times the promotion that they would have
Hmm.
done,
Hmm.
this coming year because they're going to have games, so you're going to see it all over the place. So I think it'll be a much bigger deal when it happens, and that's really good because it's a really good documentary. He took a really cool angle, um, and you're really hearing from the players, mostly the players, and a lot of the players that were not discussed in Loose Balls or not given a chance to say what their impressions of the league or certain kinds of questions. And the documentary, it's going to be called Soul Power, and it definitely is going to address a lot of that. So that's very exciting for me because that's one of the main things I've learned from talking to so many ABA players, is they have a little bit of a different look at what they did in the league than that book may imply. So we can talk about that any way you want.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because when I read the book, I was just, my heart went out to the guys because these guys, were seeing it as a shot to play professional hoops. And I feel like if you weren't playing for one of the teams in the big markets, like, or like the Pacers, or playing on Long Island with Nets when Jack J got there, and like in certain markets, you really were playing the way the book made it sound. You were playing in front of nobody, and it was not really appreciated. That's the way the
Yeah,
book made it sound. Like
right.
so.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to like just have this conversation and dive a little deeper. Like as we know, the league was founded in 1967. Now, you know, from the book, it made it sound like okay, this they really came together because the intent was always to force a merger with the NBA. They wanted to, create a buzz, create such a buzz that the NBA will
Hmm.
have to buy them out. It's
Yep.
just, but so you have people who really didn't have the long money that really
Exactly.
was required to long a league, to start a league. Some of them even had to bow out before the league even started because they realized they didn't have the money. It wasn't going to be just a get rich quick scheme that
No.
they believed it was going to be.
Yeah, long money is a great phrase. I love that. That's exactly the right way to put it. There was very little, if any, long money in the initial year of the ABA. Well put.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's for
yeah.
sure true. Yeah. The irony here is that their plan actually happened really quickly. Um,
Hmm.
and there was going to be a merger in 71.
Yep.
Uh, but they're kind of, and this is why it's ironic, I guess, but their success and the fact that there were two teams bidding for the players made it, finally, after never having been good for player salaries, they finally were able to make some real money. And that's why the
Hmm.
players sued and stopped the merger. So it was directly as a result of the ABA existing that the merger didn't happen. So I just think that's I don't know how else to put it, but that's just really, really ironic and kind of funny. And
I
I'm really
thought it
glad
was
that,
hilarious because, Oscar and the NBA, the Players
yeah,
Association was using as leverage. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
and that's something that they were not, the owners of the ABA didn't consider that. You know what I mean? Like, and
Not enough.
not
Not enough.
enough
Not enough.
because, yeah, yeah,
Not
like
enough.
expert move by the Players Association. So what cracked me up when I was reading the book is, the first president being George Mikan. I get it, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
George Mikan because he was Mr. Basketball, especially during this, like he was
Yeah.
out of the NBA, but he was still very respected. And they felt like George Mikan, as the commissioner, could open some doors. How did you feel about them being based in Minneapolis, though? I mean,
Well,
yeah,
I
he's a
think,
king in Minneapolis, especially at that time, but launching a league in Minneapolis, like, of all,
well, again, you make decisions, right? And I think I think the book notes correctly.
yeah,
That was part of the equation was he said, yeah, I want to do it, but I got to
I
do it
have
out of
to
my
be, yep, it has to be in
my
Minneapolis.
office.
Yep.
I'm not moving,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I, I, I have to assume he was a big enough deal that they agreed.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So it just, but I think
And I
it's
get
important to
it.
remember. Yeah, it's in 1967 though.
Yep. Yep.
It was the Wild West. I mean, nobody knew anything about anything really when it came to this. So they were all
Mm-hmm.
just figuring it out. And I'm sure, there were some people when he brought that up, they were like, oh, that's crazy. We can't do that. And then decided, you know what? He's the guy. So why not? We'll see. They just didn't know. They really didn't know.
And I think the key thing when we think about the ABA like now, and besides the players and the teams that came into the league, when we think about key things like the 3-point line, um, when we think about the style of play, like it was seen as street ball, but it was exciting ball to watch. You know what I mean? Like the red, white, and blue ball that is used during All Star as the money ball. Um,
Yep.
all of those things, All Star weekend,
Yep.
like those things came and are still present in the NBA today. Um, but those are things that the NBA shunned at the time. So I thought it's interesting that those footprints on the
Oh,
NBA still exist, which
oh,
is,
they're deep footprints. Like you just
yeah.
laid out, half of what the league is all about right there, and that's all. It all comes
Mhm.
from the ABA. They dramatically changed the game, and it's the modern game. They took basketball into the modern era much more quickly than was going to happen if there was no ABA. There's just no doubt about it. Because it was new and it was different. They just went for stuff, and the style of play was the right style for the right time because there were guys ready to really do some stuff on the court, and the NBA really wasn't having much of that. And the ABA said, "Hey, do your thing," and right away you got Connie Hawkins, first year, one of the most exciting creative players of all time. So they started out right out of the gate, and then you end up getting Dr. J and a number of other guys, and so they took the game from the ground to the air.
Yep.
I think,
Yep.
it's never gone back. Right, that's it. So pretty cool, and the guys, really are proud of that. I think
And
you talk.
players like Steph Curry, they have the ABA to thank for the 3-point line.
They do, no doubt. I mean, the NBA wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't even consider it, and I think people forget they did not take the 3-point line when they did the merger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like they went, "Oh, okay, that's a good idea." They went, "No, we don't like that at all. That's not what we do," and they didn't do it. So again,
Mm-hmm.
they had to kind of realize what was going on. So yeah, pretty, really, really strong footprint. And it's in the book. There's a lot of that in the book.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful that the three they brought those are some of the things they brought into the league that has a long standing
Yeah.
with the league. And you look at the 3-point shot now, I mean,
Hmm.
crazy like that you would sometimes, depending on the game, that's what you're watching. You're watching a 3-point contest the whole game.
Yeah. It's
Um
gone. It's gone too far, but
it's going too far, but we agree on that. But one
yeah.
thing I wanted, it was very clear with the ABA with the economic struggles throughout
Yeah.
the league. You had, like I said, some teams started and couldn't even some teams had to be sold immediately because the owners didn't have the money. Some
Mhm.
teams, some of the players didn't know if they were gonna get paid or not.
Yep.
Which is crazy. You give your all, you play, and you don't know whether you're going to get paid on payday. Like, that's crazy. So the economic struggles were real. If you were on some teams that were in bigger markets and that had an audience, you didn't have the same level of concern. Um, with the economic struggle, some people really, because they were banking on this big payoff from the NBA.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
TV. They're
and
banking
TV,
on
because
TV. They're
the TV contract is what they thought. They even had some commissioners they felt could help them secure that, but that did not come to pass.
well, and that killed them. I mean,
Yep, that killed
that
them. That
it
TV,
it,
yep,
it killed them, and it's unfortunate for fans too,
yep,
because I remember as a kid seeing a couple of ABA games, and it just blew my mind, and really made me a huge fan of a couple different guys. And I saw the game in a different way. And had they had a TV contract, they did air a number of games, but they didn't have a serious contract. It really would have changed the game even more, and more
mm-hmm,
quickly,
mm-hmm,
with more people being able to, like, who could see Carolina, right? You could never see them
right,
play, but they
right,
had Joe Caldwell, who was one of the most exciting players in the game. Billy Cunningham was there in his prime. They had two of the most exciting players in basketball, and nobody outside of Carolina or wherever they played on the road saw them ever. No TV. So, game, that was a gamble they lost, and it hurt them. It definitely hurt them. This is an interesting one about the money struggles. The team that won the title the first year, Minnesota,
mm-hmm,
moved. I mean,
yep,
Pittsburgh, excuse me. Pittsburgh won the first championship with Connie Hawkins and immediately moved. And then the next year, Oakland Oaks won the championship and moved. And then
yeah,
the next year, the LA Stars made the finals and moved. So, I mean,
yeah.
that's just,
Turbulent few years.
those are those are the winner, and the
Yep,
runner-up
yep,
in the first 3 years, having to leave town because they could not establish a big enough fan base. So,
yep.
that's crazy. When I figured that out, I don't think anybody's pointed that out that way. I went,
That's basically what happened. That's
it is
basically, yeah,
it's
yeah.
100% what happened, and it's wild to think about it, but that shows you how hard it was. Like you said, without long money, it was a struggle every year for a lot of different teams,
Yep.
um, just
Yep.
to see if they could make it, or if they would have to sell or move or find somebody else to buy in. Those kind of things were going on all the time. And the book does a great job of telling
The
a
book
lot of
did a
those
really good
stories.
job of telling that part of the story. Um,
Totally.
and I did, I appreciated hearing that. I also think about players like, Connie Hawkins with Pittsburgh. He got his, opportunity to play pro ball because of the ABA. You know what I mean? Like giving him that shot before he, had a
Yeah,
few years in the, but people, I feel like people, it's truth that people in the NBA really didn't see his prime
not
because
at all.
by
Not
that
at all.
time, same thing with Dr. J, like, because there was no TV contract, you know what I mean? You really didn't, get this really like, I don't know if there's much video on, you know what I mean, on these games or
Well, there isn't, but the good news is whatever is out there, they got 90% of it for the documentary.
ah,
So
I
there's
can't
going to be
wait.
a,
I was looking
yeah,
forward to this I was like, I'm not seeing any news on when it's coming.
yeah,
And you
yeah.
now I know not to even look forward to 2020
Don't,
to 26.
no,
So
but they did get a wealth of video that we have never seen anywhere. And that's
that's
awesome. I mean, that,
incredible. I can't
yeah,
wait to see it.
yeah,
To
yeah,
see
it's going to be,
players like, yeah, Connie Hawkins
yeah,
and Warren Jabali and
yeah,
Roger
exactly.
Brown and to see these players and some of these players in that in action and declare that one of the players I really want to see is like Artis Gilmore, Bell Daniels, like because I keep hearing about one thing when I was reading it, the Indiana Pacers were like the Celtics and the Lakers of the 60s, basically. Like they were like the best team in the league. And so when like I was like, I wonder, do people in Indiana realize how rich the Indiana Pacers history is? It didn't start with Reggie Miller. Like,
Well,
like
you know what they do actually.
that's
That
great.
that yeah, the good news. There's good news there. They really do. And it's funny. It's obviously not in the book, but one of the biggest fans of the ABA Pacers was Larry Bird. He grew up watching
Mm,
that team on TV and going to some games, and that's how he didn't see much of the NBA because they weren't there, and he didn't watch much TV, and there weren't that many games on TV, one a week really. So he saw ABA basketball and he loved it. And like you said, they were the top team in the league for 7 of the 9 years. Um, and so, yeah, they are well loved in Indiana, and they do understand how good that team was. They retired three numbers, should be one
that's
more.
beautiful. That's beautiful.
So yeah, and it's all over the arena. So Indiana loves basketball, and they understood and appreciated that there was a great team playing. Plus, they were in the finals or the conference finals every
Mm-hmm.
year
Mm-hmm.
for 7 years in a row.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty astonishing. It should also be mentioned that the Utah Stars, started in LA, were just that close to being as good as Indiana. They were the rivals. It was an even rivalry. They beat them twice in the playoffs. Indiana beat them twice. The Stars were really, really, really good, but they only won one title, so they don't get as much credit as the Pacers. The book does a good job of their 1 year when they had Zelmo Beatty and talking about that season with Bill Sharman, the
Mm-hmm.
things that he did that changed the game. So I thought that I learned a lot about that a long time ago, and I wanted to follow up with that because I found that team to be really interesting. And then they were great for the next 3 years after they won it, but they had to play Indiana. Only one could go to the finals. And so they just had these
Yeah.
unbelievable playoff series. I think 5 years in a row, 5 straight years. Those two teams played. And, that was a great rivalry. And the book does a pretty good job of talking about that rivalry too.
Yeah.
The players
Mm-hmm.
Players sure do. They anybody that
Mm-hmm.
played for either of those teams just respects the other team because they just went to war every year, 10 times a year in the
Yes.
regular season, and then in the playoffs 5 straight years. And they went 6 or 7 games every time. So it was as
Yeah,
close.
68, 69 that they played the Oakland Oaks and like they lost to the Oakland Oaks, Warren Jabali, 1969, 70, they played the LA Stars.
Beat
Um
them.
yeah, and then they weren't in the playoffs 70, 71, but then they returned 72, 73 and won both years and man,
Yep.
such a rich history, lost to the Kentucky Cardinals in 74, 75. Like reading about their history and Mel Daniels and just, it was, when the greats of that team, Roger Brown, some of these other, it was really great I was like, wow, such a rich history with the Pacers that I knew there was an ABA history, but reading it in here and I was like, oh, so they were like the Celtics and
They were.
the Lakers of the ABA. They were the cornerstone. They were
They
that
were
cornerstone franchise. Like to me,
100%.
ABA would be the perfect, for like small market teams. Like when we think about the NBA, you know what I mean? Like I feel like sometimes small market teams get lost. You know what I mean? Like so
Oh yeah.
the potential for, like we don't have dual leagues anymore, and not really that's respected in the US, but Indiana, I walked away with a deep appreciation for,
Hmm.
who they are and what they represented. And it's so interesting when you talk about Los Angeles Stars became the Utah Stars. Like they started like in Anaheim Amigos and then became
Yep.
the Los Angeles Stars to the Utah Stars. And then the San Antonio Spurs. They were the Dallas Chaparrals, then the
Yep.
Texas Chaparrals. So it's just
Yep.
interesting. One of the things I
Some.
forgot to write down in the notes. They have Spirits of St. Louis. I'm looking at a chart online and it has, 70, starters the Houston Mavericks, then the Carolina Cougars, and then Spirit of St. Louis. And then it has here, like in some of the notes, NBA added franchise in Charlotte. Like, how does the
Hmm,
Spirit of St. Louis link to Charlotte? Like, I didn't have them to like
I don't think
maybe
it
because it
does.
maybe it's just because they added, St. Louis and Charlotte or St. Louis. I don't consider St. Louis the South. So I don't
No.
know. That's not that link there doesn't really make sense. Okay. So I'm right to think that those,
Yeah. That
okay.
that's there's nothing there. The cool thing to me about the spirits that I thought the book did a really good job making sure that they mentioned it
Hmm.
is that they had probably the biggest upset maybe in basketball history. Any any league, anytime, even college, they lost to the Nets. The Nets were the defending champions with Dr. J, and they played St. Louis either 10 or 12 times that year, and they won every game, and they won by an average of like 25 points a game. Every game. It was literally the biggest blowout
Mm, mm,
ever that
mm. Yep.
anybody's ever
Yep.
seen. And then they played them in the playoffs, and St. Louis beat them.
That
So,
was such a I was reading that and I'm like, what the
what? Oh, yeah, I didn't know that until I read the book, and I just
Yep,
remember thinking
yep,
the same
yep.
thing.
You
Like,
just
well,
brought that memory back. I was like, my nuts. Like, what, what I mean? I didn't
what's
know.
up?
Yeah, what happened there? Like,
Well,
so
I
funny.
do have a little bit of an answer though on that one because I was so interested in that I talked to two of the main people. So the point guards for either team were Freddie Lewis. You mentioned the Pacers. He was the captain of the Pacers throughout their entire run, won three championships, and then they kind of screwed him over, and he got sent and ended up in St. Louis. And he was the veteran on that team. It had all young guys, almost all rookies, and him are the guys that played. And he
Hmm.
really led that team. And I had an opportunity to talk to him about it. And he gave himself a lot of credit, which I thought was cool because he was serious about it. He said, "Look, I was the one who had been to I had three championships. None of these guys had ever even played pro. Most of them, they were rookies. And so I just went to them, before the series started, and I said, look, here's your role. This is what we need you to do. And you got to stop screwing around with this other stuff you're doing and just focus on these two things." He said, I went from guy to guy. One was Marvin Barnes, who was pretty crazy, but really talented. And he told him, he said, you need to stop trying to one up Dr. J. He said, I've been watching you all year and you're just trying to beat Doc. You're just trying to impress him and out dunk him and outscore him. If you do that, we're going to lose. He said, you need to score when you have the chance and you need to rebound big time. You're a better rebounder. You need to clean the glass, score the ball. I'll get you the ball, but you need to do that. And he said, I went to each guy and they all kind of like, yeah, we hear you. And he said, we lost the first game. And I went around and told all of them, see, I told you, if you just do what I'm telling you, we can beat these guys. It was pretty close, but we fell back into stuff we were doing all year. And he said they could see it. They were like, okay. And he said, after that, we won four straight. And I thought,
That's
that's a
awesome.
championship. Yeah, it's a championship player who's, doing what a champion should do, and the young guys listen to him. And the young players, once they won a couple, they were like, "Oh, this is real." He's right. We're
Hmm.
winning. So then I talked to Brian Taylor, who was the point guard of the Nets, right? So he's the one going up against Freddie.
Hmm.
And I said, "What happened?" Because I was like you, I didn't know. Like, how did this happen? This great Nets team, they brought everybody back. And he said they just had egos. Guys wanted the ball. And he
Yeah,
said, honestly, there were some guys that wanted the ball that weren't Dr. J, and they shouldn't have had the ball as much as they did. And that was a problem. You had 3, 4 guys that wanted to shoot. And it's like we just had ego issues, and it cost us. It just bit us.
that's a shame.
Um,
That's a
yeah,
shame.
yeah.
Could have had more success than the Nets have. And
Well,
even though Nets
yeah,
fans, they don't. I don't feel Nets fans today respects the history of the Nets.
I don't, I don't either. I don't understand that.
I don't
I'm
get
from New
it.
York. I don't
I
get it
do.
either. Yeah.
I respect
Well,
it.
it's the
Um,
Knicks. It must be the Knicks influence. But
no,
Dr.
I
J
get it.
was,
Like if the Knicks had a history in the NBA, you better believe Knicks fans would know it and respect it. But I get it. I definitely get it. One of the things was like I said, I appreciated that the book talks about is Spencer Haywood and like it mentions the Connie Hawkins and the hardship contracts. And
yep,
really with when you look at the hardship contracts, these are players that the owners felt like they can get a good return on investment in. And really the investment wasn't real money. They were doing these
yep.
um back these deals, dog. I forgot what it's called, like the
Dolgoff plan.
dog off plans where they
Yeah,
had so much money in arrears. But like this but Spencer Haywood got that shot to
yep.
play, ended up suing, and Connie Hawkins ended up going to and then Julius Erving came out via
You sure
a
did.
hardship contract and kind of forced the NBA to kind of look at
Yeah,
signing players before they really initially wanted to.
right.
Um, and
Yep.
George Gervin, another player that, got a contract, you know what I mean, that, like, like wasn't eligible for an NBA contract at the time. When you look at that portion of the history of these players getting the attention that they deserve, you know, and I think about that, it just makes me appreciate the ABA even more that these players got to get some shine. And we got to
That's right.
even experience them more later in the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, I think the book, is a great example of
Yeah.
these guys needed an opportunity, and they got it. And then the younger guys needed a different opportunity, right? They needed a chance
Hmm.
to get in and play and
Yeah.
make money and feed their families
Yeah.
before their college class graduated. That's just a made up thing, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's just something that somebody made up and said, well, we're going to draw the line here. It doesn't mean the line is correct. It just means that's where the NBA drew the line. And the ABA was all about, erasing the lines, right? Whatever they could
Yeah.
do to
Erase
compete.
those lines and give people the
And you,
opportunity.
yeah, and you
Ironically,
could
the
be,
WNBA goes by that rule either, you know, graduate and or you reach the age of 22. And that's because they don't have the spots. But
must be, yeah,
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 that's why they do that. But I just love that about the ABA, the hardship, reading about those but I keep the dog off plan. I just wanted to shit. They
oh,
didn't have the money. They really did not have the money to play the players per what the total number would have meant if they
no,
paid it over the year, over the active years. They didn't have that money. And that's why
no.
they had those back end deals because they thought they would be in the NBA by that point. They'll merge and they wouldn't be the ones paying out those contracts.
Yeah, and it looked good too. It was all PR move too to say
Yeah,
we
it was a
signed a
good,
guy
yeah.
to a $400,000 contract that made headlines, and everybody was like, "Whoa!" And nobody bothered
Mhm.
to look and see that was 45,000 a year for 3 years, and the rest is
Mhm.
that deferred whatever you're
Yeah.
probably not going to see it money. So a lot of it was PR too, because they were just trying to battle the NBA on every front to
Yeah.
try to get people to pay attention. And it did. Those contracts got a lot of attention, a lot.
Yeah.
It wasn't
And
all good, but it
mhm.
was, it was real, and they needed that PR, and they needed to, kind of steal players. Like Artis Gilmore was a big one. I mean, for them to get Artis Gilmore was one of the biggest
Yeah,
deals
that
of the whole
was
league.
that was a huge one. And
Huge.
Julius, I mean, I'm such a fan of Julius Irving. And one of the things reading this book, like reading his book, and I need to do an episode on his book, reading his autobiography is still one of my favorite sports biographies I've read so far. This book to me, Loose Balls, really doesn't capture Dr. J. I don't think anything
No,
can really capture him or anything like that. George Gervin too. Like I love George Gervin. David Thompson, like I felt like those like mega stars of the ABA really, I don't know. Like I love to hear reading the history of the ABA, but reading about those stars, I felt like you really couldn't get a good grasp. Because Julius
that's a
Erving was kind of broke up through the book. Like it wasn't like it, and I don't
that's
know.
right.
I
Yeah,
didn't, I
that's right.
wasn't,
It was kind of year by year, so you didn't
yeah.
really get a flow of what he was doing or trying to do so much.
Hmm.
I would say that I think it's David Thompson shows up at the end of the book, right? Because
Yeah,
he was just there the last year, but
yeah.
he was such a star in college. It
He
was a
was. I remember that. I remember
huge
that.
deal for the ABA to get him. He
Hmm.
was as big a star probably as there had ever been in college because he was on TV. He was David Thompson, so he was, doing things that people really hadn't seen. But also he and his team beat UCLA, and nobody had done that in 3 years, and really in about 10 years, right? Nobody had beaten them when it counted.
Yeah, yeah.
And he did it on TV, and he did it in such spectacular fashion. He was a huge, huge star before going pro. And so that was, I think, a pretty big part of the merger too, was they wanted Dr. J, but they also really wanted David Thompson because he was very, very well known around the country. As everybody saw those NCAA games
Yeah,
and was excited to see him, in the pros because he was a spectacular player. And he finally got the dunk. He didn't get the dunk in
yep,
college.
yep, yeah.
So, so I can tell you as a kid watching, that's something that I was very much looking forward to seeing um, from him because we knew because guys were dunking in the ABA and the NBA, and you knew these guys were ready, and you were going to see some really cool stuff, and he showed it right out. So
Even
he's
Julius Irving had, great things to say about, he felt like David Thompson, like in a dunk contest had, like the better dunks, bluntly, like so he really
mhm,
had an appreciation for David Thompson. And for
absolutely.
listeners that are listening to this conversation, we are talking about the same David Thompson that introduced Michael Jordan into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, I encourage you to look up David Thompson, the Skywalker. He was, unfortunately, he was one of those players that got caught up in that drug phase. Um, and he never realized his potential, which you saw where he was leading, and, where he was going. And
Yeah,
um, I feel like, drugs robbed us of, a great career, but you saw the potential of what it could have been. Um,
yeah.
yeah, you
I
saw
would I
that.
would I would recommend people uh, go to YouTube and you can find the
Hmm.
last game of the ABA. It was Denver against the Nets
Yeah,
for the championship,
championship. Yeah.
and that final game, like game six, uh, Thompson puts on a show like mm, it's full Michael Jordan. I mean, it really is. He played a lot
Hmm.
like him, same
Hmm.
skill set, just a pretty player to watch, and then all of a sudden would just explode and dunk all over guys at 6'4" at most. But that game, if people want to see and say, well, how good was this guy? Watch that game, especially the first half. And that's as good a player as you ever see. He's just that good an offensive player. And he was doing it against the team that ended up winning it, right? With Dr. J. So he's doing it
Yep.
against
Yep.
the best team. And he's destroying guys and he's doing everything, jumpers, mid-range, dunks, you name it, he did it, and he did it like it was nothing. He did it so easy. I'd recommend people, it's not even a full game. There's a quarter missing, but you get his whole first half, and that's all you need to see. The guy was just a spectacular.
Really amazing when you think about it. And I'm glad that, like there is, like there was that documentary, Basketball Love Story. You get to see, some
Mm-hmm.
things on George Gervin and David Thompson in that documentary. Also Dr. J, they talk about Dr. J in there as well. I just felt like in a book, you really didn't get a feel for just how lethal of a
Mm-mm.
scorer, for instance, George Gervin was. And you know what I mean? They really didn't,
Mm-mm.
you know, in
No.
really capture that well. Another thing that this story I did not know until I read the book, and that was the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar offer
Yeah.
that he
Yeah.
actually, first of all, they were lucky they were able to get a meeting, um, a meeting with him. You know what I mean, to begin with. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
And
um
they did.
and they got the meeting and they didn't
Well,
even present the
you,
full offer.
the thing that cracks me up about that is, and we learned a little bit more about it since the book.
Yeah.
Um, everybody who's listening to this has either been involved on one side or another of some negotiation. I'm sure, right? Even as a kid, you're
Hmm.
always negotiating with your parents. So it doesn't matter how old you are, you understand negotiation. And this was an example of a guy who ended up being a man of his word, and that's Kareem. And he told them,
Hmm.
you make me your best offer. I'm not going to screw around and have this become a circus. I want the best offer from each side, period. And whatever you got, bring it, and I'm going to make a decision. And the ABA, especially, I guess, George Mikan,
George Michael.
uh,
Yep. Yep.
most people know that in a negotiation, that's rarely how it works, right? You just don't believe that the person is going to be a person of their word and say, no, that was it. And they didn't believe it. They just didn't think that he would stick his word the way he did. They should have known. They did a lot of research on him, and they should have known that
Yep.
that's who he was, because there was plenty of evidence to indicate that he was that guy, but they didn't believe it. So they went in with a lesser offer, and he said, "Okay, that's the offer," and he chose the other one. And then they went, "Wait a minute," and he said, "No, no, wait a minute. I told you the deal." And they're like, "Yeah, but nobody does that." And he said, "Well, that's it. I'm moving on. It's over." So that would have changed everything. I mean, everything. The basketball as we know it would be very, very different if he was in the ABA. And I don't think we really know what it would look like, but he was, by far the most important player, who had ever played. And if he went to the ABA, it would have changed everything.
Man, that would have changed everything. The
Everything.
seismic impact of Kareem joining the ABA, man,
Yeah.
that they it's
Yeah.
just that
And that,
bungle, and I get it. Like you usually when you negotiate, you don't start high. This is a
right.
case where with their research that was done, depending on, reading the book, they know they should have came out with their best offer. There is no
And
way
they,
in heck they should have not come out with the
right.
offer.
And they had the
So,
check, right? They even made up
yep.
the special $1 million check. If you're going to make it up, then give it to
Yeah, then give it
him.
to them. Like that was crazy.
Oh, that was
One of
crazy.
the things
Right.
that was disturbing about the book, and we're gonna talk about two of those things that we were thinking about, but the first thing I wanted to was how they talked about selling players. I I hated the language, and it applied to all the players, the white
Uh-huh.
players, the black players, but the way they talked about the players, the language used was like, you know, yeah, selling the player. I just didn't. It just gave different connotations, like they were indentured servants or something.
Well,
Like,
and
and
that's yeah, that's how they
yeah,
were viewed. I think, and the book was, I guess, honest in that way. That's just how it was. They were commodities,
yep,
and
yep,
like we said with the ABA especially, and it was also true of the NBA. People forget the NBA had a lot of franchises that were struggling, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not drawing any crowds. People don't understand that. But anyway, um, it just it was a fact of life. You know, you could sell a guy because weren't rules against it really. And if you needed money, that was, I mean, the Knicks did it. The Knicks bought Bob McAdoo. They bought Spencer Haywood
Yeah.
right after the merger. I mean, everybody did it, but the language is harsh. It is
The language, it was harsh to read, and I just felt like
yeah, yeah.
over
There's
and
no
over
doubt about
again, I was like, what the, like,
it.
I know we're talking about players that are signed the contracts, but when you think about how the ABA really rarely, you have players that sometimes weren't getting paid on payday. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But they're stuck on these contracts. It's almost like the relationship was like an indentured servitude type of thing, but not
Well,
really.
yeah,
But you know what I mean? Like, so when you're reading that language and you understanding that sometimes players didn't get paid when they were supposed to. And when they did, they knew to cash it. If they did get a check, cash it as soon as possible because it may bounce. Like this
yeah.
is the reality they were living in, and then you hear this language of selling players. It threw me for a loop. Like I
It was,
stopped reading it for like 2 weeks.
wow. Okay.
That's how
Yeah.
bothered by the language I was. I didn't like that.
Wow. Well, there's other stuff in there that bothered me that is along those
Yeah,
same
let's get
lines.
to it. Yeah, yeah,
But the selling players, it just was how things were then.
yeah.
That's just the language
And
that
that
we
was
used
the
to talk
language
about.
that they use because now you
It
have
was.
teams that, you have team when the power, you have the power player and power movement, so they don't exactly use the same language.
They
I'm
don't
reading
even,
the book now per player empowerment. Back then they didn't have that. So yeah, they had that language. Now they don't use the exact same language. But yeah, players are traded and all of that now too. It's just that they use a different and they're paid, but they're paid on time. They're
yeah,
paid much more money and they are, the language around it is a heck of a lot different than it was back then, but that stuck out. Another thing that stuck out to both of us is the language surrounding um the players that use more force on the court, quote unquote, they're more physical on the court, or the way they
hmm
talked about Warren Jabali and I think John Bursker, like some of the other players,
hmm
those the black players that were more physical versus the white players that were more physical. It's like they
yeah.
were physical players, but the way
It's
they
a
talked about the black players was a hint more like they were, I don't know if savage is the right word, but they weren't
close.
fit for, being on the court.
And I think that that's to me the biggest uh, flaw of the book, and that's putting it mild. That's putting it nicely because I've done enough writing and I've done articles that are oral histories, so I understand how you know put them
Hmm.
together. And people need to understand that when you do that, these guys are not printing the whole interview, right? They'll sit down with somebody
Yeah.
for half an hour and they'll get half an hour of tape and they may only choose, and that's the key word, you're choosing what to use from that interview, right? You're choosing, I'm going to use this quote and that quote, and that's it. And there's 25 minutes of other stuff you got from, let's say, Matt Calvin or Ron Boone or whoever, and you're choosing what you use. So the author is making a very conscious decision. And the decisions he made in this book were, to me, pretty clearly racist. Uh,
Yes.
very clearly. And the main guys that bore the brunt of that were, well, Jabali was the main one, and
Yes.
Brisker to a lesser extent. But those two, they use the
Yep.
word thug to describe them. And the thing that got me is I didn't see it as much the first time I read the book. I was much younger. Um, and I don't think I had the perspective I have now. But the stories about when the white guys ended up hitting those guys, um, are
Yes.
written as if they're the way they're written, the way they're set up, quote, quote, and then boom, here's the big quote. They're made, they're set up in a way that you as the reader are seeing the white guy as the hero or punching out this black guy who's been described to you as a thug, as sinister, as a bad guy. And A, that wasn't true. And B, that's a conscious decision. And I mean, there's one story in there that even at the time I remember thinking, really? But afterward, reading it again, like recently, I was like, wow, Brisker was an extremely tough guy. He was a little bit out of control and he really
Yeah.
would fight anybody anytime. So that's all true. But the story in there says that the coach, Tom Nasalki, said, my team was losing like 8 in a row. My job was on the line. And Brisker had been beating up our guys all year. We didn't have anybody really stand up to
Yeah.
them. They were
Yep. I
afraid of him.
remember the story.
But think about it. So he says, I'll give $500 to anybody that fights Brisker. Now, $500 was like 50,000 now. So understand that. That was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
people, they need to understand that that was like, whoa. Everybody in the locker room went like, whoa, that, okay. And one guy says, yeah, put me in, I'll do it. Len Chappell. And so far, you're thinking, okay, this is an okay story so far. But then the quote is they throw the ball up for the jump ball, and he just turns and decks Brisker. And that is, and you're supposed to read that. The way it's set up in the book is you're like, oh,
Oh, he
cool.
fought back. Like he
Well,
fought. He
he
fought the.
dropped him. He
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he fought the big, tough, savage,
Yeah.
tough guy,
Yeah.
and he just clocked him. He took care of business. And you think about it, that is probably the cheapest shot you can
Yep.
throw at any point in the game is when they throw the ball up. That's the one. There's no way you're thinking that. And the guy can't. That is, you need to be thrown out of sports for doing something like that. That's so cheap and cowardly. But that's not how it's written. It's written like Brisker got what he deserved when this guy just straight up cold cocked him. That is, and there's other stories about Jabali that are similar. Uh, and I can just say that I talked to many different players, African American players and white players, and their version of Jabali is not at all what is in the book. I mean, not at all. So there were some decisions and choices made there, and some of the guys that gave the quotes, uh, I'm going to call him out because there's a guy named Rudy Martzke who's in there quite a bit. He was a PR guy at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and he has some pretty terrible things to say about Jabali and a couple other guys. He ended up being the media writer for USA Today for 20 years. He was an extremely powerful person in sports media, especially when USA Today was like the only, national thing. And he's just a straight up jerk, mildly. And he's the
Mm-hmm.
one that has a couple of those stories and comments in there. And so the author chose to interview him and use that stuff where he's just making Jabali look terrible. And clearly it's just because he's just an idiot. And he's,
Yep.
he was,
Yep.
so that part of it really, really bothered me because there was another situation where Jabali got hit. And again, you're supposed to think that the guy who did it is this great hero for finally taking care of this guy. And again, it was a cheap shot. And Jabali has spoken about it. He's passed away, but he was asked about it, after his career. And he said, look, he goes, you really think that I would let a guy walk up on me in front of me and knock me out? Does
Right.
that sound like something I would do? And the person
Right.
doing the interview said, well, no. He said, look, I'm just being straight with you. There is no way I would let anybody walk up on me because I
Right.
was a fighter, sure. And he said, guys fought all the time in the ABA. It wasn't just me. There were fights all the time. And if you saw a guy walking up to you, you knew it was on. He said, I mean, did anybody else ever hit me like that? No. He said he hit me from behind, knocked me down, and okay, fine. But if you read it in the book, it quite clearly does not say that. It says that
Nope.
one of the stories says that he knocked him out and made it clear that he saw it coming and just got clocked. And so again, that's some pretty questionable decision making by the author
Yeah.
to set it up that way. And that's not how any of the African American players in the league saw Jabali at all. So I got a very, very different picture of who he was off the court and on the court as a teammate. They loved him. And I would add that there's one quote in there, I reread it today, from Al Bianchi, who was his coach, his second year in Washington after they had won the championship and moved. And his quote is, I love the guy because he played super hard for me every night. He played hurt, and he
Mm-hmm.
was a
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal player. He was our best player, and
Yep.
he played harder than anybody on the team. And that quote is thrown in there, but it kind of gets lost in all the other stuff
Because they talk so
But
much about,
yeah,
fabricated, negative stuff on his physicality that comment gets lost.
exactly. And so I think to me that put a lot of the book in different light, and talking to a lot of the players really changed my opinion of things that I had learned from the book that
Yeah.
turned out to be just straight up not true. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and it's great that the guy wrote the book. It's still the only book, really, on the
Hmm.
ABA, and it's fun. Um, but there were some things in there. Also, I can say that the players do not appreciate the fact that the book focuses so much on the funny kind of guys not getting paid, weird halftime contests, low crowds. They don't appreciate that because they were pros. They got paid to play the game. They played hard.
Yeah.
Uh, they were just as good as the NBA for a good probably 5 years of the league. And they don't appreciate the fact that a lot of people think, yeah, it was kind of a clown league. Guys were stupid and fighting. That really wasn't the case, especially at the top level for the top like 4 or 5
And
teams
I
every year.
understand that. I totally
Yeah,
understand because the way the book made it sound, it was like,
the clown show.
like it was a clown show. It was like a circus. You know what I mean? It wasn't really a
And it's
real
just
professional league. And it's like
right.
that's not
It's just
true. You know what I
that's
mean?
just so not true. It's incredible. And the fact that you can see what the ABA guys did when they got into the NBA, they just dominated, straight up dominated the first few years. So clearly, they were playing, and guys are pros. They went out there and did their job. They played hard. They wanted to get paid. They wanted to have a career. They weren't out there screwing around. There was a lot of fighting in the NBA too. They never talk about it.
Right.
The
There's always
fighting
hmm
got so bad they had to put in rules, right? When Kermit Washington,
Yep.
hated
Yep.
Tomjanovich, they, oh my God. Prior to that, there was a big article in Sports Illustrated about the enforcers in the league, like it
Yep.
was a good thing. So, I mean, fighting was part of the game, but the way they've done it in this book was disappointing. Not surprising, but very, very disappointing for
Now
me.
we know that the ABA eventually did merge, and the New York Nets became the New Jersey Nets, and they lost Julius Erving. I feel like the Brooklyn Nets have been cursed because of that, because we couldn't afford to pay Dr. J. You
Mm-hmm.
have San Antonio Spurs, Indiana Pacers, and the Denver Nuggets. They all came in to the NBA. And one of the questions that's burning in the back of my mind is those four teams. Um, I'm assuming those four teams, at least their dog off plans were honored for those four teams.
I don't think it was by team. I'm not really sure. I don't really have an answer to that. I don't think that's the case.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I
Because I
but I
am
don't
curious
know.
about the book, the way the book described all these deals. I'm like, did these players get, I know there was a ABA, there was a new pension plan that was announced that will put some dollars, some necessary dollars in some of these players that are still here, put
Mm,
in their pockets. That's long overdue.
yep.
And I was like, at least they get that because I don't think they got these dog off. Some players
No,
did get it, some players did not.
correct. And for the ones that did not, they were really sold some false, that's lawsuit type stuff. If they, only a couple of them sued because they didn't really know what was going on. Plus, I don't think they believed they were being lied to that badly, but they were.
Yeah, they were.
A lot of agents were involved. That's in the book too, which is kind of interesting. A
Yeah.
couple of guys are pretty honest about that. The
Yeah, some
agents really were,
agents were taking money off the top. There's some
yeah,
agents,
they're
some corrupt
working with the
deals.
teams. Yeah, working on the backside with the teams,
Mm-hmm.
really against
Mm-hmm.
kind of against their players' interests. Um, I mean, again, it was the Wild West. That was
Yeah.
happening, by the way, in the NBA too. You need to know that same things happened in the NBA, but to a lesser degree, not with the Dolgov plan, but with the agents. But yeah, I think it's player by player. Some guys did get paid majority of what they were supposed to get. A lot of guys did not. And
A lot of guys did not. And
no, no,
what I'm sad about is that we won't get the doc. I'm looking forward to your book.
mm-hmm.
Because we need another book out there because this book, Loose Balls, respect that there's a Loose Balls at least out there to read about. the
Mhm.
ABA and really, but we need another source too. We need,
Yeah,
another
yeah,
book out there that people can read about the ABA. So besides just loose ball. So I'm looking forward to that.
yeah,
The
I'm excited.
Spirit of St. Louis is a story that cracks me up. I just didn't want to rush through it. So I may cover that as a separate
Hmm.
segment, to end another episode. But the Spirit of St. Louis, those owners caked they got so much money from the NBA from the deal they cut,
Yeah,
the merger. It's insane. Like they
yeah,
don't, the owners of Spirit of St. Louis, did they only have the team for 2 years and they ended up making but
correct.
because they were the last owners, when they added that, no one knew what TV was going to become. Like they'll get a
Yeah,
small
yeah,
segment, small, like a really small percentage of the revenue of the four teams that, were merged in the NBA or just 2% of the NBA TV money and what that would become. Like
well,
the bane of the existence for David
yeah.
Stern for years. Like,
Well,
I mean,
and people
part
should
of me
people
had, yeah, go ahead.
people should know he's the one that negotiated the deal.
Yeah. Oh,
David Stern
David Stern
was
negotiated
yes,
the deal.
he
Okay.
was the young lawyer that made the deals like that one around the merger. That was actually his job. He was the hotshot young lawyer that was given the task of doing that. And that's the one time, or at least in his view anyway, it's the one time he got beat bad in a negotiation. It's because of two words, and it's in the book. And those two
Yep.
words are in perpetuity,
In perpetuity. Yep.
which
That's in
mean
the book. That's in the
which
book.
means forever, and that means forever. And
Yep.
that's the part
And I'm
that
shocked that those words were actually in or
well,
included in it. Yeah.
but I mean, this is how it works, right? You know this just like I do, and everybody listening. When there's a negotiation, when there's a contract, each side is trying to get the best they can
Yep.
get, and it's up to the other side to find it, right? And if you put
Mm-hmm.
something in there that benefits you and doesn't benefit the other side, it's up to the other side's lawyers to go through it and say, "Ooh, we got to take this out, we got to take that out, we got to argue about this, we got to argue about that," and that snuck through. David Stern missed it, or didn't think enough of it, and it cost them hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. And they just
Yes.
stopped. They just stopped like 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah,
They
stop. Yep. They
finally bought them out
finally got an
for
exit clause. Yeah, they got him out.
astonishing amount of money. I mean, it just boggles the mind. But again, I was just there's one guy. His name is Don Shupak. He's the lawyer that did it. And I think it was just a case of a lawyer taking the shot, right? Trying to do the best he could and thinking, if
And
I can sneak this one in there, maybe. And he did. And it was on David Stern, who then became commissioner and had to write that check every year.
had to write that check every year as a reminder of his aura
His
and
whole career, he
his
wrote that check.
yeah, and
So
that cracks me up. Like that
great.
cracks me up, but it also made me angry because they didn't pay the ABA, got off with those
No,
horrible, like dog
no.
off plans. And I was like, these owners had enough to at least pay the Spirit of St. Louis players their dog off plans with all this money they were making, and they most likely didn't get it, nor did most of the players in the ABA. And they had millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, and didn't matter. So that part of it just made me sad when you think about it that way.
Well,
But
I will give you one bit of good news on that. Freddie Lewis, who we talked about earlier, who was the captain of all those Pacer championship teams, and then was on the
mm,
Spirits when they had that big upset of the Nets, and he was the guy that made it happen. Um, he ended up he stayed friendly with those owners. They were the owners. They bought the team the year he got there, and so they really liked Freddie, and they employed him in a number of different jobs for about 10 or 15 years after his career ended. So, I mean, that was nice.
that was
Uh,
nice. Yeah.
I'm not going to go any farther than that. I don't know if they did it for anybody else or didn't, or how everyone else they handled stuff, but they did do that, which I give them credit for. So he did. He thinks they're great, and he appreciated it. He told me straight up, that was great, and I love those guys. I appreciate what they did for me. So they did do that. Um,
So that is, yeah, I appreciate that they should be appreciated for that. But for the other guys, at least, the ones that are still with us are able to experience and get, a few dollars a month from the NBAs as compensation to help them, like if the ones that are still around.
Well,
Um
I can tell you from talking to them that it's meaningful to a lot of the guys. And it's kind of sad to say that because it's not that much money. But 15, 25, $35,000 a year at this point, we're talking about
yeah,
guys who are 75, 80, 82, 83 years old, uh, is coming in handy. So it's not even close to what they deserved or should have gotten so many years ago, but uh, it is appreciated by the guys who are getting it, and it has helped a lot of guys already. So that's good. I'm glad it happened. A lot of people didn't think it would ever happen, and it did. So there was a lot of work done by a lot of good people to make that happen. And the players do appreciate it. I talked to a couple of guys, and they. I guess it made me smile. I imagine it'll make you smile. But when the first checks came, apparently they weren't expecting it. Like they didn't know the date the checks would come. They were told kind of look expected around a certain date, so they didn't really know. And the checks came, and for some guys that played a number of years, they were a little bit larger than they thought. And I think they included like a 50%, not a bonus, but they were 50% more than the guys expected. I guess the date started earlier, so if a guy was expecting like 25,000, he got 37. And anyway, these guys got the checks the same day, and then they all got on the phone and called each other
wow,
to share the good news and be like, "Hey, how much was your check? Because I got more than yeah, I got this much." And they told me
that's
that
awesome.
those
That's
calls were
awesome.
fun. Yeah, and that they kept in touch. Some guys after that, they reconnected a little bit, reached out to some other guys to make sure that they got it. And I think it was kind of a brotherhood thing, and,
Yeah.
and and a positive thing. And when you're 77, you don't get a lot of positive financial news.
No,
Uh,
that's a blessing for them. And like I thank you for the news that the documentary is coming 2026. It does align
yeah,
um with the new NBA contract and timing. I thank you for your time tonight. I've held you for an hour, over an hour. And I appreciate you dedicating this time to discuss the ABA with me. I love the knowledge you share in, our group chat. Haha. I'm happy to be to learn from you guys. And thanks again. I'm gonna let you go, and I'm gonna continue to prepare for this ultimate draft we're doing later.
there you go. That's gonna be
That's
fun.
gonna be fun. I might have to
Really.
rewatch that Ultimate Giraffe that Charles Barkley and Ernie Johnson and them did as part of All Star last year or the year before.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna
Well,
look at that real quick and
it
check that
it
out.
is. It's gonna be.
Harry West was part of that one, so I'm gonna check
Oh,
that
that's
out.
right. That's right. They did do that. Well, that's what we're doing. That's essentially what we're
Yeah,
doing.
so I'm gonna look that up. But thanks a
Well,
lot,
that's good. My
and
pleasure.
you have a good night.
Well, thank you for having me, and you have a great night too. Take
Bye
care.
bye.